this is the best part of the whole day, is talking about pigs, right?
Yes.
My advisor in graduate school said the world's really quite simple. You can just divide it into pig and non-pig. Part of the world. And when things get really bad, I try to think of that once in a while. I'm thinking, oh, I'm trying. So, yeah, today my assignment was to talk a little bit about feeding small grains to pigs, how that can work, where some challenges are. I will tell you that I'm coming at this strictly from a swine nutrition, swine production standpoint. I'm not going to fold in a lot of, pig feeding is part of the whole farming system. So, there's other reasons you might choose to feed the small grains other than from just a nutrition standpoint. I'm only going to deal with nutrition. And I'm going to work under the assumption that the standard in the industry from a pig nutrition standpoint is corn and soybean. And we can talk about why that is, but that's the standard. And so my comparisons are going to be back to those kinds of things. So, and I am not going to give you, and I'll hopefully explain why, I'm not going to give you a whole set of rations for if you're using oats, this is how your diet should be, or if I'm using barley, this is how it should be, and so forth. And hopefully I'll convince you that I didn't shirk my responsibilities by the time I talk over why I didn't do that. My background, I grew up on a dairy farm actually in Pennsylvania and knew that I didn't like a date with cows twice a day, every day. It was a really good thing for me to learn that young in life. So when I went to Penn State, I decided it's got to be livestock, but not milk cows. And I ended up working in the pig barn, and pigs were pretty cool because things happen quickly in the swine industry. And so I went through my studies. I spent some time in West Texas, Texas Tech, and then my doctorate work was at Michigan State, working with some of the premier, kind of the end of their career swine nutritionists of the day, and been fortunate enough to be at the University of Minnesota since then, looking at nutrition issues, housing issues, welfare in the swine industry, and so this talk kind of gets me back to my nutrition roots. So a little bit of the outline. One of my thoughts was, because I'm not going to give all these just set of rations, we've been doing some work with some organic producers, and what I've noticed is certain segments of production systems seem to think that nutrition for confinement hogs is different than nutrition for organic pigs or other alternative systems. The biology is the same. So how do we apply that biology is going to change in the feeding systems. So I want to give just a brief overview, kind of a nutrition 101 course, so we get everybody on kind of the same plane. Talk a little bit about the pig's digestive system and how we set up or how we evaluate feed ingredients. A little bit on the sources of nutrients, the small grains. Considerations for how we would select feed ingredients, and then a little bit of economics at the end. If you've got questions as we go, throw them out. I'm going to quit at 4:30, and if we got through the slides, great. If we didn't, so be it. With questions, we're going to talk about what you're interested in. This is my guess at what you might be interested in. So, nutrient needs of the pigs: energy, protein, minerals, vitamins, and water. Which one's the most important?
Water.
Water, very good. Pig can go without feed a lot longer than they can go without water. So, how do we, does a pig have requirements for nutrients or for ingredients? Nutrients. The corn requirement for a pig is 0. There's a lot of ways we can meet the nutrient requirements of the pig. It doesn't have to be with corn and soybean meal. Just so happens, in the upper Midwest, with the supply of ingredients and the cost, it's a very cost-effective diet just for feeding the pig. So the concept of we've got to supply nutrients to the pig, there's different ways we can do that. If you think about small grains, Northern Europe is almost exclusively small grain feeding. If you go to Australia, it's heavily small grain feeding. So it can be done, it's just we've landed on corn and soybean in the upper Midwest. So let's walk through these a little bit. Sources of water. Well, first of all, I can drink the water. Water cup, drinkers, that kind of thing. If it's a suckling pig, he gets it from the udder, right? Feed is a source of water. All our feed, even our dry grains, have some water in them. So that's a source of water for the pig. We'll talk a little bit about that. Metabolism. as the pig metabolizes nutrients, he's going to generate some water, and that water can be used in the body. So, you know, I think Mary made some comments about supplying water to cattle on pasture. That I echo that. Water, the forgotten nutrient. We have automatic water systems. We just assume they're working, but they may not be, or they may not have flow rates high enough to really satisfy the pig's need. We've done some studies. You think, what's a pig got to do in life? Eat and sleep and kind of nose around, right? Well, if the water supply is restricted, you say, well, I've got nothing else to do, they'll just drink water. Well, they don't. We've done the studies, lactating sows, growth finished pigs. If water flow is restricted, they will drink less water. And then the quickest way to shut down feed intake is to reduce water intake. So pay attention to water. Some pictures I pulled off the internet, you know, some watering gone bad here. Even outdoor systems and that, we've got to make sure we get clean supply of water. Okay, as-fed versus dry matted. Not such a big thing in the pig world in terms of feeding. Depends on the feeding system. But if we had 10 pounds of these ingredients, fresh alfalfa or meal, wet distillers or dry distillers, high moisture corn, dry corn, if we had 10 pounds of those materials sitting in front of us, which one's going to get us more dry matter? The alfalfa meal, the distiller's grains, the dry corn. So we need to make sure we think about the moisture content. And some of you were in here for the last sessions, the last 2 sessions on ruminant feeding. That's a bigger deal. You guys pay a lot more attention to that than we do in the swine world, because most of our stuff we feed is dry. We feed it on an as-fed basis, so we're accounting for about roughly 10% moisture in those ingredients. These ingredients within a line, is the nutrient value the same? Why would they be different?
Each one's a little bit different protein level.
If we look across the two. Yeah, across the two.
It's
Pretty similar. The only difference is one's been dried and the other has not. So we could argue this distiller's one, if we dried that stuff really hard, protein quality is going to get poorer, amino acid availability might be reduced. But if it's dried properly, handled properly, essentially they're the same. Okay? So my point is all we're doing is taking the water out. The water is supplying water. It doesn't have any other nutrients in it. It's just water. Okay, so energy. Energy is the most expensive component in the swine diet. Not on a per unit basis, but in terms of the total amount of diet the pig has to eat, it takes the most money to meet their energy needs. Needs energy for maintenance of the body. We just got to keep the critter alive. We've done a lot of research at the University of Minnesota. We found out that dead pigs don't grow very well. So we got to keep the critter alive, right? That's the first priority, maintenance. Growth of tissues, whether that's skin, muscle, fat, so forth. Milk production in the sow, semen production in the herd. There's energy cost for activity. We put pigs out on pasture, a more extensive system. There's going to be a little bit more energy goes for activity. Where do we get that energy? Carbohydrates. That's primarily, what we're getting in the cereal grains. All that starch in there. Fiber, I say conditionally good. Depends on the size of the critter, whether they can get a lot of energy out of that fiber or not. And fats, very good. So any kind of added fat, or if there's corn oil or some fats that are inherent to the feed ingredient, those are good. Protein is a source of energy. But I got it in red, not so good. We don't want to be using protein for energy if we can help it. It's an expensive way to get energy to the pig. So the idea is that we supply energy from these high energy ingredients or components and leave the protein to supply the amino acids for protein growth. If we overfeed protein, that's fine. The pig will break down that protein and use the carbon skeleton for energy, but it's an expensive way to get the energy to the pig.
Well, and doesn't it take so much energy to break that protein down?
There's actually more energy inherent in the protein, but to get the energy out, it has to burn some energy, so then it puts it back to the same level as here. So it's inefficient. So if we think about energy in the diet, here's a scheme, and all the details aren't as important as the concepts. Gross energy starts at the top. So if we just take whatever, let's take barley, and we burn barley in a bomb calorimeter. So you basically burn it, you measure the heat that comes off. That's the energy that's in that feedstuff. That's gross energy. So if we got 10 kilocalories from that amount of barley, the pig cannot realize 10 kilocalories of energy from that barley. There's losses. So we feed the pig the barley, and some energy comes out in feces, so it goes right through the pig. If we burn the manure, there's going to be energy in that. So if there's 10 here and there's 1 here, that means there was 9 left that was digested. Now we're starting to get to the energy that the pig can kind of use. But that's still not, digestible energy is still not the best measure, because to use this digestible energy, he also spews off some energy in like methane from gut fermentation. There'll be some energy in the urine that he produces. So we measure that, we take that off the side, and what's left is metabolizable energy. And this is what most of our swine diets are based on in the US. But metabolizable energy is still not the best measure of productive energy, because to use that energy, there's some heat increment. So when they have to ferment fiber, or when they break down the nutrients, it generates some heat. That heat is useful to keep the pig's body temperature steady, but it doesn't really go towards growth. The part that's left for growth is net energy, and that's the best, most accurate measure of energy in a feed ingredient. It's also the most difficult thing to assess in a pig. Really, once we get past gross energy, the rest of these measures take a live pig. So anytime you see a measure of any ingredient that says it's got this much digestible energy, this much metabolizable energy, you need to have a pig to put it through, go through all this stuff to measure that. So the important thing there is that when we're comparing feedstuffs, we want to try to get as far down this hierarchy as possible. Make sense? Okay. This is why God put graduate students on this earth, because they do these studies. The professors say, we need to find the metabolizable energy from these 15 ingredients. Great. I got a new grad student that doesn't know sicko. And all that is you measure the amount of feed going in, you collect all the manure and the urine coming out, you measure the energy in it, and you do the math. I won't tell you what my first grad student said. Protein. Protein's important. It is muscle growth, skin growth, milk production, hormones, a bunch of other roles. The pig really doesn't require protein per se. The pig requires amino acids. Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So if you think of, I always tell students, you think of this brick wall back here as a protein, and each brick is an amino acid in that protein. Linked together, they make a wall. Individually, just amino acids. There's 10 essential amino acids. These ones have to be supplied in the diet because the pig cannot make them. There's another 10 or so that are considered non-essential, and just having nitrogen in the diet, the pig can make those amino acids. The 20 amino acids are what go together to make a protein. So if we think of protein synthesis, we have the RNA code, kind of the recipe that's happening in the cell, and it wants to make a protein chain, wants to make that block wall. And the recipe says, go out and get me a lysine. So they grab a lysine, bring in, put in the chain. And then next it says, give me an arginine. So it goes out and finds an arginine and puts that on the chain, keeps ratcheting out that protein. But what happens is, if you don't have the right balance of amino acids for the pig, when it says go out and get me a phenylalanine, and there's none there, protein synthesis stops. And there's no replacement for phenylalanine. The recipe says phenylalanine, that's what it needs. It doesn't have it, it's not going to make any more protein. So the idea in feeding pigs is, in the diet, we need to make sure we have the right balance of amino acids so that collectively in the pig's body, these protein chains can all happen for skin, for muscle protein, for milk, whatever it might be. And there's a lot of work goes into that. We'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. So this brings on the limiting amino acid concept. The idea that if you think of this barrel, and in the barrel is water, is the protein that you're making, and each barrel state is a particular one of those essential amino acids. The first limiting amino acid, the one that's supplied in the lowest amount, dictates the maximum amount of protein that can be produced. So if we don't have enough lysine, we're going to make enough protein until we've used up all the lysine, and then it will stop. What's going to happen to the water? It's going to peel out of the barrel. And all these other extra amino acids, they're going to get broken down for energy, which is inefficient. So if we can come back and add some lysine, get it higher, then we can make more protein behind that dam. So amino acid balance is really important. Vitamins, two categories, fat soluble and water soluble. Fat soluble vitamins basically are supplied in a little larger amount. The pig can store those because they're soluble in fat. Water soluble vitamins, pig doesn't really have any body stores for those. So we got to make sure those are in the diet. Natural feedstuffs supply both fat soluble and water soluble, but very inconsistently. We can't count on how much of those are supplied. So typically we just supplement them to the diet. Minerals, macro minerals, micro minerals. Macro needed in large amounts, micro in small amounts, all important. Again, most of these are supplied by premixes and base mixes because, with the exception of maybe phosphorus, most of them don't count on the natural feedstuffs to be the sole supplier. Where do we get these vitamins and minerals? Well, maybe fresh forage if you're outside. Some natural feedstuffs, we worry about availability, and particularly if they've been heat processed, where there damages some of those vitamins. So we just add them. Macro minerals, and then vitamins and premixes. Premixes where we get the vitamins and trace minerals. So we think about this digestibility. The pig's digestive tract, very similar to ours. Pig eats, goes through the stomach, comes up through the small intestine, and then hooks into the cecum. And this spot right here, I want you to remember that, where the ileum, the small intestine, attaches to the large intestine. And then things come through the colon. This is where a lot of fermentation takes place. And then out into to the rectum and feces. So if you look at that, compare that to the ruminant, basically from the abomasum, the true stomach and the ruminant, from their back, pretty much it's the same critter, basically. The only difference is the ruminant's got this rumen, the fermentation vat on the front end, and allows them to handle forages better than the pig. So when we talk about feeding high fiber diets to pigs, we've got to think about these digestive differences and how they handle those. So in the pig, available nutrients, basically we talk about expressing nutrients on a total basis, so just to measure how many nutrients are there. We can look at them on a digestible basis, so that's basically what they eat versus what came out the other end, and the difference is what was digestible, like DE. Or we can talk about available nutrients. And available nutrients are the ones that are absorbed and actually used for productive functions. For digestible and available requirements or nutrient estimates, you gotta have a pig. And there's lots of different ways we can talk about how you measure that, but you gotta have a pig to make those estimates. So on some of the more minor feedstuffs, it's sometimes hard to come up with these numbers because nobody's done the research or done the work. Excuse me. Total concentration of total nutrients will always be higher than digestible or available nutrient concentrations, just by definition. So if we talk about this pig, I think of a pig as a tube within a tube. So basically, there's the opening to the tube, and here's the exit to the tube. And it doesn't actually enter the pig until it crosses this gut wall and gets into his body proper. Because what's in the gut? All kinds of microbes and all that stuff that's going to make the pig sick if it crosses the gut wall. So really, both ends are open to the environment. So what we do is we feed pigs whatever nutrient of interest, we feed it, goes through the system, and for amino acids in particular, we put a cannula right there. We put a hole in his intestine and we collect the digestive that comes out here. Because what happens from there to here is what the pig actually did, what he absorbed. What disappeared is what the pig consumed and can use. It entered his body. And then we can measure what comes out the other end. And then we got all this fermentation happening in the colon. And that really kind of jimmies with the numbers. Because you got a lot of microbes that are growing in there and they can add stuff. They can take stuff away. So when we're interested about fiber digestion, this is where it's happening. So our ileal digestible numbers and our total tract numbers are going to be different based on the nutrient because they're measured at different points. And I'll refer to, in some tables in a minute, we're going to talk about standard ileal digestible numbers because that's truly what the feedstuff value is to the pig.
However, can you qualify that? I don't understand. Because there's some additional value that's being derived in the cecum, but it's more highly unpredictable?
It depends on the nutrient.
Okay.
So if I want to know amino acid digestibility, I want to know here.
Okay.
Because whenever I measure amino acids coming out here, I don't know if it's because of what we fed the pig or because what we fed the pig made a bunch of microbes grow here. And when I get here, I can't distinguish whether that amino acid came from a microbe that grew off some fiber or it came from the feed that the pig didn't actually digest. Make sense? No, you're still puzzled.
I am still puzzled.
Okay.
I've had this in class before. Well, it's just that the benefit from those microbes in the cecum would be as a result of that feed. Right?
True.
So why isn't that added to?
Because the absorption of those amino acids happens here. There's not a lot of absorption of amino acids that goes across the gut wall to the pig back
So
here.
what's absorbed out of the cecum, out of that?
Volatile fatty acids.
Thank you.
So that'd be the energy.
Yeah.
A sow can get maybe up to 40% of her energy requirement
Okay,
from the cecum, but there's not amino acid absorption back here. There's not
okay.
Sugar absorption back here. So, so this is basically the rumen put on the back end, kinda, because you're talking to ruminants about the volatile fatty acid absorption. And then if we want to talk about horses, they're all screwed up because their rumen is way back here, right? So, so nutrient digestibility estimates, we have those for the common small grains. And then basically we look at digestible or available bases for energy, amino acids, and phosphorus primarily. So it's going to be a little hard to see here. Basically I wanted to point out this is just an old lab report on a feed sample that we sent off. It's telling me some stuff about the moisture content. It'll express them on an as-is basis. That's how they got it with the moisture in. It'll express them on a dry matter basis. So I'd say we take all the moisture out. It's 100% dry matter. Most swine diets are expressed on an as-is basis. You go down through here and you'll see ME, megacalories of metabolized energy per pound. They didn't measure that. They didn't run it through a pig at the Iowa testing lab. They have a prediction equation based on the other nutrients. And so that number may be okay, may be worthless, depending on the ingredient in their equations. So here's my justification for not giving you a whole set of diets. Basically, I'll give you a reference at the end. A fact sheet we wrote several years ago about farm-specific swine diets. So basically, for me to formulate a swine diet for your farm, I want to know a bunch of things. I want to know what you want to feed. We'll talk about why you make those choices in a minute. But I want to know what level of performance do you want? Do you want to max them out and push them the whole, hard every day? Or do you have cheap facilities and you're not necessarily after maximal gain? So that's a target. What do your pigs eat? Do you have a high intake line or a low intake line? What is the productivity level of those pigs? Are they a high lean growth line or are they kind of moderate? What about the sows? Are they producing 13 pigs per litter, wean? Or are they at 10? All those things affect what their nutrient requirements will be. So we need to know what they need in the diet, and then we say, okay, now how can we take this mix of feedstuffs to match those nutrient needs, realizing that they're only going to eat this many pounds of feed per day. Then you can start to package everything together. So, as you start to think about using small grains, you need to work with a nutritionist that can line those things out for you and help you zero this stuff in. Because some small grains might not make sense for certain phases of production based on your targets. And if you just go to the local elevator and say, I want a grower diet with this kind of these ingredients in it, well, they can give you one, but it may not match your growth potential. And so you need to think through those things. I'm pretty adamant about that. So let's assume that you've measured intake, you have kind of set your targets, what you want to achieve with your feeding program. Then we need to sit down and think about selecting and feed ingredients. And in my mind, these are the things that I'm going to think about. What's the nutritional value of the ingredient? Are there anti-nutritional factors we need to consider? What about characteristics of that feed ingredient? If there are any feeding limits, which kind of ties back to the anti-nutritional things, any processing or logistical issues to consider, and then, of course, what's the economic value or the cost of that ingredient? So if we think about the nutritional value of the ingredients first, basically I've gone into the Swine NRC and pulled out the net energy. Remember, net energy was the best measure of energy, productive energy in the feed ingredient. And I pulled out from NRC the last version for corn as a basis of comparison. Then I chose barley, hulless barley, oats, naked oats, rye, sorghum. I hadn't been to this conference, so I didn't know whether to consider sorghum a small grain or not, so I just threw it in, so you can ignore it if you want. Triticale, and then a couple types of wheat. And this is net energy in kilocalories per pound. And basically, the take-home message here is, if we use corn as the standard to compare against, sorghum comes basically the same. Naked oats, take the hull off, you just got the oat grain, very high energy. Everything else is lower energy. Okay? Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not applicable for a swine diet, but just realize that you've got lower energy, and we'll talk about why in a few minutes. Why do we put corn, or why would we consider putting small grains into the swine diet? What are we after? Most important thing.
Higher protein.
No, not protein.
Fiber.
Pardon?
Fiber.
No.
Energy.
Energy. You put the grain in for the energy. And so, if you think of trying to evaluate these, all these small grains are replacements for corn from the energy source. And if you get protein, or you get some fiber, or you get some more available phosphorus, that's kind of an added bonus. And you should take advantage of that. But the primary reason is for energy. So if it's lower energy, but you can recoup some value with more available phosphorus or fiber, maybe you're trying to slow those pigs down a little bit, or you've got a gestating sow, you're trying to bulk her diet up. These are good choices. So just think of it from that perspective. The wheats come pretty close to corn. What's in these grains? What's the big driver to supply the energy in them? It's the starch. Okay? The seed is supposed to coddle that little, I'm not an agronomist, my plant physiology stuff just is terrible. I hated those classes, but the little baby wheat plant that's in there, the embryo, the starch, kind of matches with livestock. The starch is what's to feed that critter, right? So that's what we got in the grains. So here's the energy. Just kind of think about that picture for a little bit. So now let's look at the lysine content. I put SID lysine, standard ileodigestible. So that's measured at the end of the small intestine. So we're getting the true value of what the pig can extract in terms of lysine. And lysine is the amino acid that's first limiting in swine diets. So remember that barrel, if we can increase the amount of lysine we supply, we're going to have more water build up behind in that barrel, make more protein. So from a lysine standpoint, look at where corn is, 0.185%, and look at all these other small grains. Sorghum is actually lower, very much like corn, but all of these are quite a bit higher. So there's a value for the small grain to kind of offset the deficit it had in energy. And the neat thing about standard ileodigestible is this is what the pig can actually extract from those ingredients. If you look in like that lab report that reported lysine, corn is about 0.25% lysine, if you just measure it. But if you run it through the pig and measure what it can actually extract, it comes out to 0.185, so it's something less. So these numbers for these other ingredients, this is what the pig is actually extracting from those small grains in terms of lysine. Okay?
Do you have this against soybeans? If you compare the lysine concentration of small grains and soybeans?
We can look it up. What would you expect would be? Would
Almost.
be a lot lower. Because remember, why we put soybeans in the diet? For protein and amino acids,
Right.
and it's targeted because it's so high in those.
Right.
So these would be much lower, way lower than soybean or soybean meal, because these are lower protein. The digestibility might be about the same, but there's just less of it there.
Oh, I see.
Okay. So another one, we look at STTD phosphorus, standard total tract digestible phosphorus. This is the amount of phosphorus that you can extract, the pig can extract out of the small grains. Here again, how does this compare to corn? These small grains are all higher. Okay? I put this one in question mark because I didn't have an estimate, so I just used the oat number that came across, so just to flag that. But in particular, the wheats are very relatively high in digestible phosphorus because corn in particular and a lot of grains have a compound called phytate. Phytate is a compound that ties up phosphorus, and the pig does not have the enzyme to break that down to make phosphorus available. Where wheat has some natural phytase activity and lower phytate, and so that phosphorus is much more available. So again, there's a benefit for some of these small grains on the phosphorus story relative to corn.
Do you think we started using more small grains, we could use less phytase in the feed?
You could use some less phytase in the feed, yes. Would it reduce phosphorus output in manure? Maybe, but it depends on your basis of formulation. You know, if you're doing it right, you should be targeting that right to the pig's requirement. And if you use phosphorus from here versus from some other source, it should be the same. What this does get you is you could maybe use less inorganic phosphorus, so less monocal or dicalcium phosphate. Be a benefit there. Goes back to the whole idea that pig requires nutrients. And if we can target the nutrients with a variety of ingredients, so be it. I mean, that's good. Talked about fiber, the NDF concentration of these grains. basically not a lot different than corn. A few of them, barley in particular, he mentioned. Oats is very high in fiber. We'll talk about that in a minute, whether that's good or bad. But most of these are somewhere around the same, not a big difference. So, talk a little bit about the nutrient value. We could go even deeper and go into more nutrients and everything, but those are kind of, in my view, the biggies. What about anti-nutritional factors? A lot of things we need to be worried about in not just small grains, but feed grains, natural ingredients. Trypsin inhibitors, molds, mycotoxins, tannins, lectins, so forth. Whole list of things here. Many of these are more concentrated in the protein feedstuffs. So leguminous plants, that kind of thing, tend to have more of those. A few of them we'll talk about here now. Mycotoxins, a problem across the grains. Mycotoxins would be metabolites of molds, stress molds. And if you look at a sample of ingredient, you can say, well, I don't see any mold, so there's not any mycotoxin. No. The mold could have been there and is gone, it died, it's gone, but it left the mycotoxin behind from the field or storage or whatever. Multiple mycotoxin could be present. We'll talk about that in a minute, but there's like, you're taking this, I don't know the number, 400, 200, I don't know, tons of mycotoxins. And we don't know all the single effects of all those mycotoxins and metabolites and so forth. It's a really messy field. And mycotoxins are commonly a problem, so we need to be on the lookout for those. These can affect the pig's performance negatively, and sometimes their health and maybe even their life. And once those mycotoxins are there, it's really hard to neutralize them. Basically, the first solution is to dilute them. Find clean ingredient to dilute them down so they get below the threshold. Or there might be some binders or some additives that we can use, some new ones that have come on the market that could be helpful. Some of the thresholds here, these are out of the book. Aflatoxins, ppb is parts per billion. ppm is parts per million. Zearalenone, 1 part per million in growing diets. Zearalenone is an estrogenic toxin, so it acts like estrogen. So that's why the recommendation is try to keep all these mycotoxins as much as possible out of the breeding herd. Because if we have a sow, we're trying to get her in heat, and now we've got estrogens in her feed, that really mucks up things. Vomitoxin, basically as the name would imply, if they feed very high levels, if the pig will eat it, they'll vomit. Typically they'll just back off feeding, they won't eat it when it gets high. Thumb rule is 1 part per million. I'll show you some data that it's might be lower than that. Fumonisins, ergot is one we'll talk about. That's single mycotoxins research where if we add those to the diet, here's the threshold levels. But if you start getting combinations, it gets really difficult to know which levels are a problem, which aren't. Here's an experiment we did just earlier this year. Last year we did the experiment. And basically we had grower diets, corn soy diets formulated with a high protein distiller's grain. And not that any of these are small grains, it's the mycotoxin I want to tell you about. And basically, same diet, same formulation, same nutrient specs. And after 8 weeks, we saw this about a 10% reduction in performance of these growing pigs, and similar reduction in feed intake. We suspected that the distiller's grains had a high mycotoxin level in them. If there was mycotoxin in the corn that went to the ethanol plant, you take all the starch out, pretty much, thumb rule is, you concentrate them by about a factor of 3. So now they get more concentrated in the product, and I forget, I think we had like 30% distiller's grains in these diets. So we were bringing a big slug of that back in. So what we did, we sent the analysis off of both the diets and the distiller's grains, and found in the final diet we had, have it written down, but I think we had like 0.7 parts per million of vomitoxin, and we had about 0.2 parts per million of fumonisin, and there was a couple others in there. So we went and we reformulated the experiment, and we added a binder, a product that Provini put out, and then for the next 8 weeks, we measured performance, and we see here, here's the controlled diets with no distillers. Here's the diets with the distillers in it. We added the binder. We got growth rate to come back and go up, and we had feed intake go up. Here's the one with the distillers and no binder. Here's with the binder, and we got improved performance. So there might be some possibilities of using some of these products to bind mycotoxin, make it unavailable to the pig, and then it won't have a negative effect. It never got across the gut wall into the pig.
So if I'm bringing in distillers or I'm growing my own small grain, where do I send that for analysis?
North Dakota State has a lab. Many of the commercial labs do mold mycotoxin screenings. And when you send those off, you need to think about you need to talk to the lab before you send them to find out what you're getting, because you can get a screen. Mycotoxin screen just says, we looked and here's our thresholds and we found these mycotoxins. Or you can get a quantitative test that says, well, you have vomitoxin and here's how many parts per million it is, the actual concentration. If you're going to use blending to reduce those levels, you need to know how much you're getting. Okay, some characteristics and feeding limits for various ingredients. Barley, some of the advantages. There's reports of whiter, firmer carcass fat in the pigs. Why would that be compared to corn and soy? Guesses? No, not so much the fiber. Fat. Corn has a lot of corn oil in it. Corn oil is soft, it's a vegetable oil that a pig pretty much deposits the fat that it eats, where a ruminant hydrogenates everything and makes things more saturated. So if a ruminant eats corn oil or soybean oil, some soft fat, it tends to hydrogenate it and make it firmer, where a pig just puts it on its carcass. Not exactly, but pretty close. So like if I take a finishing pig and I feed him fish meal, a lot of fish oil in it, what do you think the pork smells like and tastes like? Fish. Yeah. So, I don't know, it's probably the market, we could move into the sushi thing or something.
Right.
But, the other thing that makes it, so since it's more saturated, it's firmer fat, and there's no carotenoids. Corn has carotenoids, the orange, yellowish color that you find in carrots. Barley doesn't have that. And so that doesn't get deposited, and the fat tends to be whiter. Some markets that's important. I mean, it's not like one's greasy yellow and one's snow white, but there are distinctions. Barley also has a benefit in sow gestation diets in particular because of the fiber content. Those sows typically are limit fed, and they're never satisfied. So we can feed a bulkier diet. With barley, those sows will still get the calories they need, but not excess, and maybe feel a little more satiated. The downside of barley, there's beta-glucans in there, and those beta-glucans can interfere with nutrient digestion. And so there's some work, maybe some enzymes like beta-glucanases can be added to try to counteract that. In general, they probably work better in poultry than they do in swine, but that enzyme thing is continually evolving. There are some trypsin inhibitors, an anti-nutritional factor in barley. Not a big deal, they're there. Trypsin inhibitors interfere with protein digestion.
Are the threshold levels that determine that?
Yeah, but basically I put them in there because in the literature, it's not really going to be an issue for barley. Trypsin inhibitors are a big deal in soybeans. That's why you heat soybeans, to destroy the trypsin inhibitors. Oats, advantage, the high protein, we saw that. A very good amino acid balance. It's high in lysine. Gut health effects, someone mentioned fiber in the gut, the hind gut. we're still trying to understand how fiber works in pigs. A lot more interest in fiber in pigs in the last 5 or 10 years. And understanding how those oat fibers, there's a mix of insoluble and soluble fiber in oats. You have who eats Cheerios. It says on the box, heart healthy because of the soluble fibers in there. I did some sow work feeding different fiber sources, and we used oat hulls for our soluble fiber source. And the old timers will tell you have scouring pigs at weaning and that, put some oats in that diet, that'll tighten them up and improve gut health. So we're learning some of that, trying to understand what the mechanisms are. Oats have a little higher fat than some of the other small grains, and that's an advantage because it has some added energy, but then the extra fiber kind of counterbalances that in terms of energy value. The other challenge with the fat in oats is there are a compound called lipases. They're enzymes that break down fat in the oat grain. So when you grind oats, there's a possibility for that lipase to break down the oat fat and then make it more susceptible to rancidity. So the recommendation is if you're going to disturb the seed coat in that grind or anything like that, you won't want to store that product very long. You want to grind it and then use it so that you don't have any of that rancidity problem going on. That's the disadvantages. Rye, heard a lot about rye today. Productive on low fertility soils, a reasonably favorable amino acid balance, but a poor digestibility. So when really at the end of the day, there's not a real big benefit to the protein in rye compared to some of the others. Ergot contamination is a real concern with rye. And ergot would be a fungal contamination of the seed head. It creates some mycotoxins, some glucosinolates that do a lot of nasty things. They, really extreme cases can kill the pig. They cause gangrenous things to happen. They're gangrene in some limbs. It interferes with protein digestion. So there's been a lot of discrimination against rye for pig feeding because of the ergot possibility. If you want to look out for it and monitor it, manage it, probably be all right. Pentasins are another kind of a fiber in rye that interferes with amino acid digestibility. And so that's probably the reason, or a big reason why there's poor amino acid digestibility. Sorghum, I didn't hear about sorghum today, so I'm going to skip that because I'm running out of time. Triticale, higher lysine than corn. It's better phosphorus than corn. It's got lower ileal digestibility, that's standard ileal digestibility than corn. And because it's that wheat rye cross, it's susceptible to ergot a little bit more. So same comments as go for rye. But again, a useful ingredient if you watch out for it. Wheat, high amino acid content. The phosphorus digestibility in wheat is better than corn, so there's an advantage. A disadvantage, I say price. Typically, the farmers I know that are growing wheat, they're growing it for food grade wheat, and then if they don't make that because of their protein or docks or whatever, they say, oh, can I feed it to pigs? So often, feed wheat is going to be a little lower quality than milling wheat, and so price often takes wheat out of the mix. The other thing is you got to be careful in grinding wheat. And you get you're making flour out of it normally. You get very small particle sizes when you grind it, and that can really increase the incidence of gastric ulcers in pigs. So
Do you have a recommended size for grinding?
yeah, you probably want to be somewhere in that 600 to 700 microns, where corn, some of the others were, guys are really pushing down to 400 to 500 there. Feeding limits, we talked about a lot of these things. Nutrient deficient carcass effects might limit how much of an ingredient you use. And here's a table. I can get these to you. I finished these slides over the weekend, so I didn't get handouts printed. But these are recommendations from the National Swine Nutrition Guide. It's a group of nutritionists, both industry and academia, across the whole country. They put this guide together about, 8 years ago now. And we see that barley, in all classes of pigs, there's no limit for barley, no limit for wheat. We look at oats. Basically, the limitations are due to the fiber content. We get out here, gestation sow, no limit. She can handle that fiber, no problem.
The numbers are percentages?
These are percentages, yeah, good point. Well, it's obvious to me.
Just-
I should have units on it.
Just
No,
wanna make
that's
sure.
good. She called out Mary on one, and I got my due. I'm not going to show my grad students. I'll always beat them. What's the units? Put the units on.
Yeah.
There I did what my dad used to say, do as I say, not as I do. So yeah, these are percentages in the diet. And you see as the pig gets older, he can handle fiber better. So the limit goes up. Rye, again, basically a lot of this is driven off of ergot concerns and maybe amino acids. Triticale kind of follows some of that same.
So would that rye be different if you know it's ergot free?
If it's ergot free, and this says it's based on no ergot,
Oh,
it's going to be basically the amino acid digestibility
okay.
issues.
Is that National Swine Nutrition Guide available online?
It is available at U.S. Center for Pork, USPC, U.S. Pork Center of Excellence. Some of the last considerations for feed ingredients, processing and logistics. I'm going to skip over some of this pretty quickly. We want to grind it in some way, either roller mill, hammer mill, break that seed coat, make that starch available. Fineness of grind, less than 800 microns. The smaller you get, the more concern you have with ulcers, and depending on your feeding system, maybe some shrink and wastage. That, it gets floury, you can maybe get some separation. I threw this picture in as an example of particle size reduction. Our organic farmer told me he feeds pumpkins and the pigs kind of play with them and that, but if I break them open, they'll eat them all up. So he's reducing the particle size. So, and here's what happens to particle size reduction when you go from 1,000 microns of the grain, this is corn diets, to 400 microns in either a pelleted diet or a meal diet. This is gain to feed, so a bigger number is better. Your gain to feed goes up, and on this end, so it gives more surface area for the digestive enzymes to attack. But also, ulcers and gut problems go up as well. I'm going to skip this one to get to
I got confused. You said, go back to your next one back.
this one.
Yeah, you were talking about the wheat, keeping it at
Somewhere in here.
700
Somewhere in here.
microns. And then if it was too high, it created gut issues.
No, if it gets too small.
If it gets too small.
If I'm saying grind it somewhere in here, as we go this way, the ulcers are going to go up. But as you go this
Oh,
way,
okay, I missed it.
you gain
Okay.
the feed is going to
Okay,
get better.
thank you. Yeah, okay.
Okay. And on wheat, some of those that get real fine, you also got issues with pigs don't like it real fine, so they do some sorting. And then the other thing is feed flow through the system.
So that's why the pellets perform better, right? Because they can't sort it.
That's part of it. And then we've also got some heat processing going on here too.
Right.
And so there's been some gelatinization of the starch, so it makes it more available. But sorting is also a piece, and that's assuming good pellets.
It's
If
also
you do-
less messy because you're not losing as much with all adjustment, and you're having more of you get higher intake because it's all at least going in that pellet instead of in the meal.
Less wastage.
Right.
You lose less. Yeah, an extreme case of an example of that is if you got sows on pasture, you use those range cubes, the really big things, as opposed to meal feed. You get more of the feed into it.
So does pelletizing help with that rye digestibility?
Sorry?
Does pelletizing, the heat of the pelletizing help with rye digestibility?
Probably a little bit, but not a lot. Because there's the other fibers that are in there that are interfering with that. So some logistical concerns. Just when I think about a feeding system for pigs, I think about how much is available and how much can you be switching out all the time. Is there consistent supplies, a consistent product? If you want to feed Triticale and you got enough for 3 weeks worth of production, is it something you really want to mess with and have a whole set of diets formulated for? And then there's the issue of switching pigs from one feed to another. Pigs tend to be a little more forgiving than cattle maybe, but still can be an issue. I wanted to get to economic value here a little bit. How do you decide cost? Well, it's purchase price. What's the transport to get it to where you're going to feed it? Do I need to have any special handling equipment for it? Do I have storage for it? We talked about nutrition. What about waste? And then the risk is the whole mycotoxin thing, and you want to deal with it or not. And ways to evaluate ingredient costs. I would argue that feed cost per ton is probably one of the worst economic measures. Things that are probably a little better are feed cost per pound of gain, feed cost per pig marketed, or profit per pig. These profit per pig in particular, there's a lot of other things that go into that profit number. So probably some of these measures are a little better because they take into account the performance of the pig as well as the cost of the feed. Now here's some kind of quick and dirty equations that Ellen Miller, my mentor in graduate school, we developed in grad school way back in the day. The biology is pretty much the same, but basically, and I apologize, I didn't get time to convert these to cents per pound, but the price of barley is based on the price of corn and soybean meal that it's going to replace in a diet. And so if we plug into these formulas the price of corn in cents per kilogram and the price of soybean meal in cents per kilogram, that will give you the value of that small grain. Example. We said corn was $3.13 a bushel. That would be 12 cents a kilo. I'm using 56-pound bushel weight. Soybean meal, $3.50 a ton, or $3.05 a ton. That's 34 cents a kilo. Remember, there's 2.2 pounds in a kilo. And barley, it's $6 a hundredweight. I think I worked that. Barley is 48-pound bushel weight standard. So that's like $2.90 a bushel, I think, or something. 13 cents a kilo. So I come down to that formula, this one here, 0.88 times 770 times 12, the cents per kilo of, cents per kilo of corn, plus 50 times the cents per kilo of soybean meal, divided by 820. So basically, these are the amounts of corn and soybean meal that barley is going to replace in the diet, and this is an upper limit, 82% in the particular diets that we formulated. Go through this equation, do the math, and says the barley is worth 11.7 cents per kilo. And the market is saying it's 13 cents per kilo. You gonna feed barley strictly based on economics? Probably not. Now, we put the farming system in, all the other things why you want to have small grain, those add in. But just based on economics is one way to do some comparisons.
But if you start factoring this in, so you got your own pigs and you're doing this yourself, that's fine.
Yep.
But if you're working with like an integrator,
Yep.
I've worked with in my lifetime. Those guys are all about corn, soybean, amino acid. I mean, it's all about how quick can I crank these pigs out of that deal.
Mm-hmm.
To get consistency. So they're feeding 22,000 head farms.
Yep.
So try to implement some of these systems in there. We got to get them to realize that there are other reasons that they want to do this
Yep.
to get them to do it. And that's a tough sell
Yep.
because corn and soybean meal is easy.
Yep.
And all mills are set up to handle it.
Yep.
You know, so how do, I guess that'd be a question, is how do we start working with them to see that they should put bark or oats back in their gestation rations? It's a great move instead of hulls or mids or something like that. The fight we always got at the mill was, I don't want to buy everybody's weed seeds.
Yep.
Because the oats came in dirty, it had weeds in it, I don't want to buy everybody's weed seeds.
Yep.
You know, so that, I think that's something we need to talk about, is how do we get the integrators or even the medium-sized integrators to look at buying this small grain from us.
Okay, so a couple of things there. We go back to, I'm going to have to go too far back. The reasons for supply, there's a tonnage available. They're not going to formulate diets so you got to have the product there. Is it consistent? You know, it's not going to be probably that much different than some of the other grains that they're buying. Tonnage is a big thing for those guys. And then, you know, if you position some, like in the integrators, the barley thing might be much easier to sell for just getting stock bags. That could be a fair bit of tonnage. But then you have to go back even further to look at, I forget where I'm at now. The, wherever I was, you have the handling equipment. So now the mill has to have a whole other set of ingredients.
Set of bins.
And they're not gonna have that unless they know they're gonna have the tonnage
Right.
to fill it and to buy the feed. So it's a chicken and egg thing.
Let's catch 22 all the time.
The other thing that, you know, you can hear listening to Dr. Liebman, did I get that right? What do you want to call it, the eco services or the whole system stuff. You know, I know that Smithfield is doing a fair bit of work looking at supply chain, carbon economics, or carbon balance, footprint, some of those things. So they're putting that, if they decide to use other stuff, they're doing it not for nutritional reasons. They're seeing benefits in other part of the business of the farming system to say that it's there. You can argue whether it's a marketing position for them or whether it's true altruistic, we're making the world better kind of,
But it's
but
probably a combination of both. I mean, I don't believe any of those integrators are bad people.
Right.
In their own aspects. They know what they're doing, they're trying to make money too, so.
right,
I don't think they're out there saying, oh, I'm just gonna rip a guy off.
right.
But it is an end user claim, they're looking for these kind of things. They like to see that on the label when they go to wherever they buy the wheat from.
And, you know, I work with a lot of those people in those kind of systems, and they say, well, you know, if I'm going to use them, displacing something else, and you know, why did the 1,000 head finishing barn develop? Why is it 1,000 head? Because a semi, it's the efficiency of feed transport, and they can get, so it had nothing to do with biology or it's logistical kinds of things. And so those other things are probably going to figure in much heavier than me as a nutritionist would like to think. I mean, we all like to think science is driving everything, but it's a lot of these other things.
Well, there's so much feed in, so many pot bellies in, so many pot bellies back out with the finished pigs. You know,
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
It was an economic move of how long does it take to move product.
And, you know, and no matter the size of the producer, at the end of the day, if you're not making consistently whatever is considered a reasonable profit, the system is not going to be sustainable. So we'll skip that. I only got 5 minutes. Some sources, National Swine Nutrition Guide. There's another book called Non-Traditional Feed Ingredients for Swine. It's a good one. Morrison's Feeds and Feeding. I had that on my shelf. I still go back to that. I had a grad student do a whole thesis project. It was based on about 2 pages in Morrison's Feed and Feeding.
Is that the last edition that was done?
I can't, that's the last edition I have. I don't know if that's the
No,
last.
it's to like 64 or 62.
It's pretty, I don't think
There
there's
was
any
a
like newer one.
abridged version that went into the early 60s before they stopped printing it.
Okay, I have this one and I have a mid-40s version on my shelf. But I was doing some work with cottonseed oil and I went back to Morrison's to find the base data to justify the grant. So I still keep that. This fact sheet is the one that we wrote on kind of formulating farm-specific diets. That's the web address. Extension has been changing, been jigging with our web pages, and I don't know if it's there for sure or not, but if you give some time, I can help you track it down if you're really that interested in it. So, nutrition of pigs fed small grains isn't really different than pigs fed corn. It's just a different source of nutrients that you're supplying, or different ingredients you're using to supply the nutrients. Small grains can be effective in swine diets. Economics, availability, a lot of these other decisions are going to drive, issues are going to drive how much small grain goes in the diet. So we've done this right along. Questions? Thanks for sticking here till the end of the day. And in this case, I'm worried about the pig. Yeah, the kid might have flu, so I don't want to transfer it to my pigs, right? But,
Can you go back to your slide with your references on it?
Sure.
Please? Thank you.
I mean, it'd be great if we could get some integrators like even on just the sow diets to start adding oats, but then there's difference in the oats too, you know, some oats are more high oil oats or more feed quality. The milling oats aren't quite as good a quality at that point, so you almost gotta start selecting for, you're gonna do that, and then you're limiting your market to this area of using them, so.
We're doing some work at Morris, you know, this whole cover crop thing and that, and my colleague Yushi Lee got a USDA grant, and we're going to feed some camelina meal. Camelina is, from what I can tell, is kind of the darling of the cover crop thing.
Camelina, you said?
Camelina.
Yeah.
And it has been hell for us to find enough camelina to feed, I'm only feeding 200 pigs on a nutritional trial, and we know a guy in Wapaton that's growing 52 acres, but his froze out, ours froze out. We're gonna bring it in from Oregon, I think. And it's, I get them twisted up, she keeps me straight, but it's a spring camelina and we want winter, because the Canadians say there's a difference in their swine study. And so it's like, well, the integrators, they're not even gonna look at you unless you've got enough product to feed them, but the growers aren't going to grow it if there's not a market for them to grow it. And that's where this guy with camelina, he said, I took a risk on 52 acres and I was expecting 1,000-pound yield and we got 300. And he can sell it for cover crop seed. So I said, well, you better sell it to them because till we bought it $1 a pound and paid for the crushing, our meal was going to be $3,400 a ton. And we didn't feel comfortable we could justify that to USDA, so we said we'll buy it for $300 from Oregon.
Have you tried dried peas at all?
Pardon?
Have you done any research with dried peas? Like the yellows or the greens?
No, we've not looked into a lot of these alternatives. There's a fair bit of field pea data out there. There's one in Europe uses a lot.
Yeah, and NDSU's done quite a bit of research on dried field pea.
Yeah. And, you know, there's a lot of variety differences out there, but I know some guys in our area are using some pea mixes. We visited a fellow in Wisconsin who was feeding strictly a barley pea diet, and he was looking at a direct market kind of thing, and that was one of his sales points, the non-GMO thing, and he was targeting a very specific audience. He's getting on fine. So again, we can feed them waste food, the refuse, restaurant waste, that can work. There's some companies looking at processing that. When I was in school in Michigan has a lot of food processing, and my advisor, we wrote a fact sheet, salvage candy, potato chips, potato waste, all those kind of things.
Bakery products. You used to feed
Bakery, yeah. A lot of guys will still, the integrators will feed dry bakery waste.
Yeah.
So I mean, the pig can do that. It's just, we got to figure out, make sure, he's one of us.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we can eat it, they can eat it.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. Yep. Pigs used as a model for human nutrition all the time.